All right, welcome into the North Star Takes podcast. I am Bailey Paulicki, and this is my co-host, Jacob Liberta. This will be a mostly Minnesota sports-centric podcast, but we will also get into larger national sporting events as well. On today's first episode, we're going to talk mostly about the NFL draft, potentially do a little bit mock draft action, go over some mock drafts maybe, discuss the Vikings plans at pick number 14, and then later on, we'll also get into catching up on some Twins and Wild notes, as well as maybe the Timberwolves. So, Liberta, we're a week out from the NFL draft. How are you feeling about it right now?
Honestly, it's one of my favorite times of the year, especially the NFL season. The draft brings all sorts of excitement into the new league year that we're going to dive into here in 2021. So, especially for our hometown Vikings, can't wait. There's all sorts of options at play here. There are so many options available to us, and I'm really curious to see what Trader Rick does. You know, he might move up, might move down, we might stand pat. I guess we don't really know.
Yep.
You never know with Spielman. He's pretty tricky. But
That's true.
I'm very excited. How about you? How are you feeling?
I'm very excited as well. This is one of my favorite sporting events of the year, I would say. It's a time that always offers hope for a fan base that usually doesn't have hope. So I'm feeling pretty good about it. I think it'd be hard for them to screw it up this year because they do have a few positions that they need. Mm-hmm. Obviously, we'll get into what we would love for them to do.
Yes.
But I don't know. I think it's going to be interesting. We kind of know how the top of the draft's looking, especially at the very top. Mm-hmm. But things are going to get interesting at pick 3 and 4 with San Francisco and the Atlanta Falcons picking. San Francisco's definitely picking a quarterback. Which one do you think it'll be? I mean, people are saying Mac Jones, but I feel like they can't pass on Justin Fields.
Yeah, I know. That's basically when we think the draft is really going to start, once we get to that 3-4 range, because it feels like, obviously, Trevor Lawrence is a slam dunk for the number 1 overall pick in Jacksonville. But number 2, probably about 99% sure to be Zach Wilson, unless the Jets got some surprise that they can't wait to unload on everyone on draft night. But realistically, once we get to 3 in the Niners, that's when the real speculation begins. And all literal signs point to Mac Jones right now. I mean, you got all the shots, John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan at the Bama Pro Day interacting with good old Nick Saban,
Yep.
And it seems like Mac Jones is the pick, but then you got guys like Fields and Lance bringing more intrigue because they're having these second pro days, maybe showing something to the Niners that they didn't see the first time around, maybe can change their minds into picking them instead of Mac Jones. So right now, I got to go with literal signs, just go Mac Jones and just think, I won't think too hard about it, I guess, just because I think Kyle Shanahan, everybody knows he loves Kirk Cousins, and that's basically what Mac Jones is, in my opinion, and I think to a lot of draft experts, that kind of seems like maybe his ceiling, but,
Yep.
I mean, you never know. If he could fit in the system in San Francisco, great, and maybe be better than Kirk. I mean, obviously, that's probably the goal, but at this point, I got to say Mac. I don't know, you feeling Mac Jones? You feeling Lance or Fields or something? Or which direction you leaning?
I feel like the 49ers can't be dumb enough to pass on Fields and Lance to pick Mac Jones. I mean, we've talked about this a lot. I think in today's NFL, you need a elite athlete, mobile quarterback to give yourself the best chance to win. We've seen Kirk Cousins over the last 3 years. He's one of the best arm talents in the NFL. He's very accurate. He's got a great arm. He can throw the ball down the field. And I think Mac Jones can do all the same things. But the pocket presence isn't great. He takes a lot of sacks. He fumbles a lot.
Exactly.
Passes get deflected. You need a guy that can escape in today's NFL. And I think if you pick a guy like Mac Jones over an elite athletic talent like Justin Fields or even Trey Lance, if he needs to sit for a year and learn, I think it'd just be a huge mistake. And as a Vikings fan, I wouldn't be upset about the 49ers doing it that way. But if I was a 49ers fan, I would not be happy with all these Mac Jones rumors going on right now.
No, I'd be upset. I know I've seen some steam for people like Mac Jones. They're like, he's one of the smartest people we've ever interviewed. Like, he's going to beat you with your mind. And honestly, he's going to have to, considering his mobility compared to the rest of the quarterbacks that are being so highly evaluated in the first round. Because he's not going to win with his legs like these other guys like Lance and Fields may provide you on those, like, second plays, so to speak, where the original play breaks down, but then they keep it alive by getting outside the pocket and making something happen, where Mac Jones isn't really going to do that, and that's the same limitations Kirk has, which with the way the league is evolving, I mean, you almost got to lean more towards the athlete playing quarterback, just so then you're getting guys more along the lines of like Mahomes and Josh Allen, some of the best young QBs in the league. Obviously, I'm not going to say these guys are the next, this is Josh Allen, like, of this past year. This is going to be Patrick Mahomes. Like, these are generational talents. Mahomes, he could be the best ever play when it comes right down to it. But I I think there's got to be some common sense here where I think you just got to go more towards with the way the league is trending, because if you don't, sometimes you get left in the dust, and that can be a huge problem, especially when they've invested as much draft capital into getting that third pick this year.
Right.
So
Absolutely.
So what are you thinking beyond that though? Let's say, for the sake of assumptions, let's say Kyle Shanahan takes Kirk 2.0 and Mac Jones is off the board at 4 or at 3. Excuse me. Who do you think is going at 4? Like, where do you think that 4th pick is going with? Atlanta? Are they trading? No, are they taking the QB of the future? Are they taking maybe a big playmaker?
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, honestly, this is truly where the draft starts. We know the first 3 picks are going to be quarterbacks. Atlanta's a complete wild card. They could draft their quarterback of the future and sit him behind Matt Ryan for a year or 2.
Mm-hmm.
I think Matt Ryan's still got a couple of years left on his contract. They could also go with the win now mode and think that their team is ready to possibly compete, and they could take Kyle Pitts.
Mm-hmm.
He's probably the most elite non-quarterback in this draft. He's a tight end that can basically play wide receiver. You can play him in the slot. You can play him outside.
Mm-hmm.
Trading out is also a possibility, because I think there's going to be teams that want to get up to 4 to get a quarterback too.
Absolutely.
So I think it's going to be very interesting what Atlanta does, and that could really set the course for the entire rest of the draft.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I think that's where it's going to be an inflection point almost, where they go with Pitts. I mean, that's the guys like draft experts like Daniel Jeremiah are saying, like, if I were to pick a guy right now in this draft class that I think has the most Hall of Fame potential of anybody, he said it'd be Kyle Pitts. And some people think Kyle Pitts is so good that he could be the top overall player, even Trevor Lawrence included, which is that's high praise. It's kind of crazy to kind of fathom that with a tight end. You wouldn't really think that, but I guess anything's possible. But you almost got to think, though, they got to lean towards maybe the hometown product like Justin Fields. He's from Georgia, so I'm sure everybody that's a Falcons fan is pretty familiar with Fields and all of his big games he's had at Ohio State, winning that huge game against Clemson and Trevor Lawrence in the college football playoff. So I got to say they should lean towards the quarterback, but since Ryan's got a couple of years left on his deal, it's really hard to say. They got a new coach, and maybe they want to have a guy that they're grooming behind Ryan once his contract expires, but it's really hard to say. I think if I were the Falcons, I'd take the quarterback in the future, but right now I'm leaning towards thinking they'll take Kyle Pitts just because he's just a generational talent.
Right. So let's get straight to the Minnesota Vikings here. Obviously, this is what we care most about.
Absolutely.
So they're picking at 14. It's kind of a tough spot to be picking. I know we were kind of pulling for them to lose their last game against Detroit. They would be up they'd be up a couple more spots in the draft if they would have done that. But so they're sitting at 14. They obviously have a chance to get a really good player, immediate impact starter, whether it's along the offensive line or the defensive line. If a quarterback falls, it's possible they could pick a quarterback too, and groom a guy for the future. So what do you think is most likely to happen that the Vikings will do at 14? Do you think they'll stick there and pick a guy? Do you think they'll trade back, maybe try and recoup a second-round pick that they lost with their Yannick Ngakoue trade that was a complete failure? So what are you thinking that the Vikings will do?
Honestly, if I'm in the frame of mind of Rick Spielman and how they operate and what we've come to know here between the Spielman and Zimmer pairing, I'd say they're probably going to trade back and try and acquire a second-round pick that they don't have right now. And because Spielman likes as many draft picks as possible. So I kind of feel like if the price is right, to trade down, I think he will. But then if no teams are really interested in trading a second-round pick or maybe a future first or something to move up the board, then he might not feel the price is right there. So then maybe he stands pat. And who knows? You never know who's going to be there.
Right.
If I'm Spielman and staying at the pick, I could probably see them taking an offensive lineman just because it's a gaping hole right now. We don't have a left side of the offensive line here. So you'd almost have to lean more towards like a Christian Darrisaw or Elijah Vera Tucker. And I think either one could provide probably a day one starter or be a day one starter for us. But then it comes down to how much influence does Zim have. I mean, what do you think? Do you think Zim's got a lot of influence? Maybe make that like a defensive edge, like a defensive end pick, an edge rusher?
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see. I mean, it makes sense to pick an edge rusher at that spot, especially if obviously all 5 quarterbacks are off the board. Although if Mac Jones is there, I don't really care for him. I wouldn't want us to pick him. It would just be like having a younger Kirk Cousins behind Kirk Cousins, and I don't think we need that. So I think offensive line would probably be the smartest play. But if like the top 3 offensive tackles are gone and it's just like Elijah Vera Tucker sitting there, I'm not really sure if they'd want to reach for him, especially if they view him as a guard, to get him at 14. So I think it would make sense to trade back, maybe move back 6, 7, 10 spots, who knows. Try and get a second-round pick back, and then maybe an offensive lineman still falls, or maybe one of these defensive ends that people think can start right away will fall. The Vikings really do need a guy opposite Danielle Hunter. But at the same time, all their offseason moves have been defensive-centered moves.
Exactly.
So I don't...
You got to help the offense.
Exactly.
Eventually.
One of these in-house guys needs to step up and be the other defensive end, I think, personally.
Yeah.
I mean, you can still draft a guy in the mid-rounds, but the main focus for this draft should be offensive-driven, whether that's getting a quarterback of the future, getting a couple offensive linemen that you think can start right away, because the offensive line was horrible once again last year.
Yep.
So, like I said before, I think it's going to be hard for them to screw this up. I mean, obviously they could pick a cornerback and just, infuriate the entire fan base.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I don't know. I personally, I would go offensive line if the top 4 quarterbacks are off the board, we'll say.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with that, honestly. I think, people will be rioting outside TCO and calling for people's jobs if we walk away from this draft in a first-round corner. I don't know how people feel about that, but unless they're just totally Zimmer stands, but otherwise, I think people would be pretty upset. And I think, now that you mentioned the stipulation that if the top 4 quarterbacks, like not Mac Jones, but the other 4, if they're all gone by the time we pick, then I think we got to go with one of those top 3 tackles if they're there, whether it's Sewell, but it'll be gone. Slater, I think, will be gone, but there's a possibility there he could be there, but not pretty slim. But Christian Darrisaw is a very realistic option there. But let's not assume those quarterbacks are all gone. Let's say a guy like Trey Lance is still on the board. I honestly think we got to jump all over that. I know that's not exactly probably the frame of mind of the front office and the coaching staff right now, because that's not going to help us in 2021. But I think we couldn't pass that up. I mean, he's a top 10 pick in this draft class. And if he was there, I think we got to take advantage, because he could solve a huge problem that we've faced for the last 50 years as a franchise, realistically. I mean, we've had guys come and go here, like a Cole Pepper. He was all right in the early 2000s. And you have Kirk the last few years, Captain Kirk. But otherwise, it's just a bunch of one-hit wonder seasons with like Case and Favre. So, we haven't had sustained success at the quarterback position that can really put us in contention every single year. So, I'd say we got to take Lance if he's there. How do you feel?
I agree. First of all, he's a Minnesota kid, which is awesome.
Exactly.
Second of all, he went to NDSU, which their last 4 quarterbacks have now made it to the NFL. And I'm slightly biased going to NDSU myself, but I got to watch him play for his full freshman season, and he is an elite athlete. He's an elite player. He's very accurate. He's got a good arm. Obviously, he can run. I mean, he ran for a bunch of touchdowns. He threw no interceptions. I mean, granted, they don't play the best competition at NDSU, and I think he's probably still got some learning to do. I think he's only 20 years old. So this would be the perfect situation for him to come in, sit behind a guy like Kirk, who's very playbook driven. He loves to study, he loves to watch film, teach Trey Lance, show him the ropes. I think it could be a good situation for him. Like you said, it doesn't help us this year, but at the same time, if you can find an offensive lineman that can start, if you can sign maybe another one that can start, it's a little patchwork, but I think this team is good enough where it is right now. If you add a couple offensive linemen that aren't even big names, that they could compete for the playoffs this season. And then, you could frame that up to Zimmer and say, I think we can make the playoffs even if we draft a quarterback. And then if they do, Zimmer keeps his job, Spielman keeps his job, and then they can trade Kirk, get him out the door.
You get that contract off the books, and then you have so much more money to spend, and you can look into upgrading Zimmer's defense next offseason, and then that'll play right into his hands, which would be great. And then if you think about it, this offensive tackle class is so deep that I think we can get starting caliber help us right now players in the second and third round. Obviously, we don't have a second-round pick, so we'd have to trade back into the second round, but we have 4 fourth-round picks and a couple third-round picks, so we have the ammo to move back in the second round and take one of those starting caliber tackles, which I think if we take Lance in the first round, maybe get a guy like Brady Christensen in the second round from BYU, and then maybe get a Kendrick Green in the third or fourth round. You get 2 starting caliber, I think, on day 1 starters on offensive line, plus you get a quarterback that could potentially be your long-term fix that will keep your job for the next 10 years, assuming you don't turn this season into a train wreck.
Right.
So I don't see that many negatives to taking quarterback this year. Obviously, it's a roll of the dice because, statistically speaking, it could go 50-50. I mean, there's it's more likely, honestly, that he's going to bust than he's going to work out. But if you get this right and he turns into the player you think he can be, and Vert Kubiak really likes him, then you never know.
Yeah.
He could really be the one to bring the Lombardi Trophy home to Minnesota the first time that we've deserved for so long.
Right,
We've gone through so many heartbreaking losses and so many crazy seasons that I think it's about time we get that guy that can give us a chance every year.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. So let's explore more of the trading back part of it.
Mm-hmm.
If they do trade back, like you said, this offensive line class, especially a tackle, is just solid.
Yes.
So who are some options you think that could be realistic if we trade back, say, into the mid-20s?
I think in the mid-20s, and you're feeling probably if we're trading back, then we're not taking a quarterback in the first round. And we probably explore our two biggest needs, which should be in the trenches, whether it's offensive line or defensive line. I think our marquee targets would probably be guys like Tevin Jenkins, maybe a Dylan Radins, maybe a Sam Cosmi, because they all kind of fit the build and the mold of recent offensive linemen the Vikings have drafted, like Brian O'Neill and Ezra Cleveland. So athletically, they'd kind of fit the bill for offensive linemen we want. Or we could go, honestly, one of those edge rushers, because I know that that's one of the biggest wild cards in this draft to me, is that they don't have any of your edge rushers going top 10 because there's no clear-cut guy that everybody's like, this is this is like common consensus that this guy is the best edge rusher in the class. So honestly, I could see a guy like Kwity Paye being that play there in the mid-20s. I mean, he could go as high as, like, I've seen mocks where he goes 12, but I also seen mocks where he goes down maybe near 30 or something. So, like, he could be an option there. I like Azeez Ojulari a lot out of Georgia. I know he's only got the one move. He's got the cross chop. But, I think we have the best defensive line coach in the league. And that obviously biasly speaking, but I still think he develops guys like no other. I mean, Danielle Hunter was a really raw project, third round defensive end. Now he's one of the top 5 pass rusher in the league. He's one of the best to do it right now. And so honestly, I could see him working with Ojulari. He's got a high motor. He's a pretty athletic guy, so maybe he could work some magic there and crank out a second starting defensive end opposite Danielle Hunter and on a cheap contract. So I think those would be the biggest names in play. I mean, what do you think? Any other names you got to add?
Yeah, I mean, I like those offensive line names you brought up. I think it would make a lot of sense for this team if they do end up trading back to explore getting one of those second-tier offensive tackles. Tevin Jenkins, from what we know at least, is basically a right tackle. So you'd have to move Brian O'Neill to left tackle, and I don't know if you really want to mess with your best offensive lineman.
Yeah, exactly.
So I would prefer to go left tackle in this spot, and obviously Becker, Minnesota's own Dylan Radins would be perfect fit for the Viking scheme, honestly, and it'd be fun to watch him play for his hometown team.
100%.
Sam Cosmi is like the most elite athletic offensive tackle in this draft based on his athletic testing scores. So I think it makes sense to go tackle here. And then if you can get that second-round pick back, that's where you pick your defensive end, I think, personally. And then you fill your 2 starting holes right there. Then really all that's left to get in this draft is a guard and then maybe a depth safety. So I think it makes a lot of sense there to go left tackle if you trade back in the first round.
Yeah, I think I agree with you because I think there's a lot of first-round caliber tackles we could take there. And you'd like to think we could pick up an edge rusher there in the second or third round or something. Because I've seen guys where usually if they're like a defensive end where they're like kind of a one-trick pony and maybe they're really good at pass rushing, but they're not exactly great in the run defense and they can't really set an edge. Like you can kind of develop that. But you can get a guy that's good at one thing in the third round. We got a couple of those third-round picks. So I'd like to think we could find some guy. And like we've never taken a edge rusher actually higher in the third round with Andre Patterson, but that's just because he can make it happen with whoever you're going to give him. Like I think as long as they're like athletic, I think he can mold them into a guy who can play the position well. So I'm really liking that idea more towards the tackle in that first round.
So very quickly here as we wrap up, you get one name. Who are the Vikings picking in the first round?
At this point, I'm going to say Christian Darrisaw.
Okay.
I think they're going to get the franchise left tackle. We don't usually pick this high. I feel like this is one of the only times where the Vikings are really in a position to take a franchise left tackle, one of the most important positions on your team, arguably. In my opinion, I think that's a guy that you want to invest highly in. So I'm going to say Darrisaw, even though he doesn't quite fit the mold. Not typical offensive lineman for us. What do you feel?
I would say Darrisaw as well. I think it just makes a lot of sense. It fills an absolute need, and he's Kirk Cousins' blindside protector.
Exactly.
So that'll do it for our mock draft chat segment here. Our next segment will be about the Twins, Wild, and maybe we'll even throw in some Wolves thoughts. So we'll take a quick break, and then we'll get right back to that.
Yeah, that's good.